So what's your favorite yeast for making a Saison? The Dupont strain has a reputation for making a complex Saison but being prone to stall. Belle Saison, a dry yeast, has a reputation being very easy to use but maybe not quite as complex. Well, to give it a try, I brewed 3 gallons of wort and split it into 3 fermenters. I used WLP 565, the Dupont strain from White Labs. I used Belle Saison, a dry yeast. And then for the other gallon, I threw in some Voss Kvike just to mix things up. Well, let's get brewing. Well, thanks for stopping by. My name is Brent from Cascades Homebrew. The focus of my channel is on brewing great beer using modest equipment, following simple processes. If that sounds interesting to you, and maybe you want to learn a little bit more about homebrewing, well, go ahead and click that subscribe button. But let's just jump right into some information about the recipe and the brewing process. This brew day starts a lot like most others, filling a pot with water. But this one has a little twist. So I want to try and squeeze a full 3 gallons of wort out of this batch. That means I need to start with 4 1/4 gallons of water. I can hear you now. Man, you're crazy. You can't mash 4 1/4 gallons in a 5-gallon pot. Well, so I'm going to set aside some of the water for a dunk sparge. I think I set around 3 quarts of water, or about 3/4 of a gallon, or 2.8 liters. My goal was to keep this one simple so that the yeast character would shine through, but also target a fairly traditional Saison recipe. So the grain bill for this one was just Pilsner, with some cane sugar added into the boil. The mash was for 149 degrees Fahrenheit or 65 degrees Celsius for 60 minutes. The hops for this batch were all German Herzberger hops, with 1.4 ounces or 40 grams added at the 60-minute mark, and 0.9 ounces or 25.5 grams added for 10 minutes. Note that the German Herzberger I had is a 2.2 alpha acid, so I needed to add quite a bit to get up to my bitterness level. I'm trying to get a little more volume out of this batch than with my typical stovetop brew in the bag process. To get the full 3 gallons of wort in the fermenter, I need to start the boil with 3.9 gallons, which leaves me about 3.2 gallons post-boil. To get the extra volume, I add in a dunk sparge. Essentially, I just move the grain bag into this bucket. I then add in the water that I had set aside earlier. I mix the grain with the sparge water and let it sit for 10 minutes while the wort in the kettle starts heating towards boil. So I then move the grain bag into my colander to drain into the bucket, and I give it a good squeeze to get out most of the liquid. I then add the wort into the kettle. And hey, look at that, I'm very close to my target pre-boil volume. As the wort gets close to boiling temps, I add in my bittering charge of Herzberger hops. And then I mix in the cane sugar. Then with 10 minutes left in the boil, I add in the last addition of Herzberger hops, along with some Irish moss and yeast nutrient. It looks like I calculated my water volumes correctly. At the end of the boil, I'm right on track with my target post-boil volume. I chilled the wort down to reasonable pitching temperatures using my immersion chiller. I then added about 1 gallon of wort to each fermenter. I will just jump ahead to filling the second fermenter down in the sink and pretend that I did not actually spill wort on the counter trying to awkwardly fill the first fermenter, thinking I could get a better camera angle with the fermenter sitting up on the counter. No, that didn't happen. The main goal of this batch was to trial 2 Saison yeasts. I used some harvested WLP 565, which is a Belgian Saison from Dupont, and I also used Belle Saison, which is a dry yeast. The Saison batches started off in my lower level at around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I moved them to a warmer location after a few days. I also wanted to see if I could get a full 3-gallon batch out of my process, so for the 3rd gallon, I used some harvested Omega Voss. I've used Voss a couple times in hoppy beer, so I thought it would be interesting to judge the character in this simple batch. By the following morning, both of the Saison batches were off to a great start. Oddly, the Voss batch was a little bit slower to take off, but by day 2 it was ripping away, and about a day later it looked like it was done. So these Saisons have been in the bottle for just about 2 months now. Before I jump into tasting, I want to quickly cover some of the gravity values for this beer. I was actually kind of surprised when I was putting this together. These are a little higher ABV than I had anticipated. So the original gravity on this batch was 1065, which is a little bit higher than I had anticipated. The WLP 565, which is the Dupont strain, finished at 10004 to give it an 8.1 ABV with a 93.5% attenuation. The Belle Saison finished a little bit lower at 1001 for an 8.5 ABV with a 98.4% attenuation. And then maybe as expected, the Voss finished a little bit higher at 1007. That gave it a 7.7% ABV with about an 88.7% attenuation. Yeah, so looking back, the ABV was a little higher than expected. And I think my original gravity was a little higher. I think the dunk spars probably increased my efficiency a little bit. And then also these are just attenuating yeast. And then also I had a fairly low mash temperature. I think all that combined ended up with some fairly high ABV beers. Well, let me get into drinking these beers and I'll come back with my thoughts. Well, I'm back. So what I did was I had mixed these up. The Voss one clearly visibly is quite different looking just by the head. And I knew that would be quite different. I mixed these up and I wasn't quite sure. I was kind of curious if I would be able to detect them. And they actually were pretty easy to detect. So beer one here, this was the one that's the 565, the Dupont strain. This one here, beer two then, is the Belle Saison strain. So they look identical. It's a really a pretty looking beer, really a nice color. Looks like I got a little bit of crud from the bottle in the Dupont one. I'm going to talk about the Saison strains. That's really what the focus of this experiment was about. Both of them, really nice carbonation. I've been trying to play with the carbonation level in my Belgian beers, but these ones have a nice, bubbly carbonation level. The head has been, is retained. I love that. It's got that noble, spicy aroma. This is a Herzbrucker hop. The Pilsner, this one is almost a smash beer, just Pilsner with some sugar and then a single hop. You get a little bit of that underlying, Pils malt, a little bit of that sweetness, a little bit of, grain character, which is really nice. It's a really nice, light and refreshing beer. The ABV is hidden very well, the alcohol. When we talk about the differences of them, I'll talk about, the reputation is, that Belle Saison makes something that tastes like a Saison, but it's not very complex. And the Dupont one is just a little bit more complex. And I think that's exactly what I get here. With the Dupont one, on the aroma, I'm getting some kind of pear, apple-y, fruity character. I get the hop character kind of shines through a bit with some of the grain sweetness. And then on the aroma, I'm just getting more of those sort of peppery, the desirable phenolics that you get in a nice Saison. I feel like these might be a little too bitter. It might be a downside of the recipe. There's a little bit of a bitterness. So Belle Saison, again, dry yeast, very easy to use, fermented strong, fermented down low, and it does have that. I'm not sure if pepper is the right word. A little bit of phenolics. They're more subtle than the Dupont one. Is my quest for a perfect dry yeast for a Saison? Is Belle Saison the one? I'm not sure it is. I think I like the complexity get out of the Dupont one. I think the Dupont strain this one was very similar in complexity to the Omega Saison Stein, which is another one that supposedly doesn't have the stall reputation. I have not actually had the stall issues fermenting anything with the Dupont strain, just trying to keep it a little bit of an open ferment. So I guess my takeaway is that the reputations kind of fit these, at least some complexity, and some people may like a less Saison-y Saison. If you're just looking as an entry level, I've heard Drew Beecham say he likes the French Saisons for more if you're doing like a fruited or a hoppy beer or some kind of a special Saison, just something quick where some of those subtle complexities may get hidden. And then if we look over at the Voss again, this was sort of, I thought about doing the experiment. I want to do the trial side by side. I want to do a small batch, and I thought, you know, could I get 3 gallons out of my system? And what yeast do I have around that would be interesting to put side by side? You know, because Voss is, you know, farmhouse. It definitely does not have any the phenolics, any of the pepper, any of the complexity that you associate with the Saison yeast. So this one was fermented at around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It started kind of slow, but then took off and then just finished quickly. It fermented strong for about a day and then was done. The reputation for Voss is it got a strong kind of citrus orange character, and maybe you get more orange character when you ferment it hotter, 85, 90. Most of my Vosses have been fermented at 85 degrees, and most of them have been fairly hoppy beers. So I thought it'd be interesting just to evaluate what does Voss bring to a beer. It's clearly not. It's not. This is a fairly light grain bill, fairly simple. You know, some hops. It's definitely not lager-like. This beer is not lager-like, but it's not really strong orangey either. I think it's, you know, I think I could easily see fermented 80 degrees with some other flavors in there that Voss would, you know, the orange character that I've gotten some of the other beers, you know, may not be as strong. So I guess it's interesting. It's hard for me to describe, but for me, it's useful to kind of taste some of the character that is associated with Voss in a fairly simple beer. I get the spicy, the noble Hersbrucker hop character. I get a little bit of that grain, you know, simple grain character from the German Pilsner malt. And it's actually it could be a quite nice beer. You know, it doesn't fit into a style. It's not a Saison. It's not an American blonde, but it's just a good, easy drinking beer that I could see people enjoying. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the tasting there. If you enjoy this kind of yeast experiment, be sure to check out this video. If you want to learn more about small batch brew in the bag, go ahead and check out this video too. And while you're at it, be sure to hit that subscribe button to get more of my content. And get out there and build some great beers.